back in session.
I should have gone to the washroom.
You can hold for 10 minutes to introduce and slip out.
Order number 4, sir. In the name of the Honorable Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Medicinal Cannabis Industry Bill 2019.
Mr. President, before I commence, I want to state that I want to seek your and certainly the Senate Chamber's agreement that order item number 4 and 5, the Sacramento Cannabis Bill 2019, be debated as a cognate debate. I think all honorable members would recognize the close link between the two bills in terms of the cannabis, and seeking your approval.
The question is that item number 4, the Medicinal Cannabis Industry Bill 2019, and item number 5, the Sacramento Cannabis Bill 2019, be debated together as cognate bills. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. And the leader of government business may proceed to treat them as first cousins.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I must say at the outset of this debate, I understand the sentiment in Barbados regarding these two important bills. But I am comfortable in this honorable chamber this evening, recognizing that on both sides, on all sides of the chamber, there is in fact support for this bill. Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, I can say so because when I referred, and it is a document of this honorable chamber, to the manifesto of the Democratic Labour Party for 2018, the next 50 stand strong Barbados towards a digital economy. And I go to page 33, I see drugs and harm reduction. And I see here, if I may quote, our plan for the next 5 years, decriminalize medical marijuana and possession of less than a minimum quantity of marijuana. So I know that if perhaps there are any members of the Democratic Labour Party or representatives within this chamber, Mr. President,
Mr. President, on a point of order, the leader of government business is misleading the House. There are no representatives of the Democratic Labour Party currently here. There are independent members and there are members of the opposition. So references to the Democratic Labour Party can be misconstrued, and therefore they should be refrained from.
And you sure you speak for all? Please proceed.
Mr. President, thank you, Mr. President, thank you so much. I was taken aback. I was taken aback by the response, but I know I've read somewhere about who the cap fits, but certainly not in here this evening. It fits no one. It fits absolutely no one. In terms of the opposition senators, I know I have their support. They belong to the Bishop Atlee disjointed grouping, and I know that the Gurley Bishop has spoken in connection. The Gurley Bishop has spoken in this regard, and I know that I have their support, even though we might hear some fire and brimstone, but I know I have it. And certainly on this side, It is not new, it is not a surprise. On page 25 of the BLP's manifesto, building the best Barbados together, which the members of the population of Barbados went out in their numbers in May 2018. We say the BLP, medical marijuana, significant strides have been made in the use of marijuana in pain management and for the treatment of a range of medical complaints. And the Barbados Labour Party will not deny Barbadians access to modern treatment modalities. The BLP, like the DLP, will legalize the use of medical marijuana. So, Mr. President, I know that I am solid ground this evening in terms of support for legalization of medical or medicinal use of marijuana in this country. Mr. President, the bill that we'll be debating obviously has been drafted to give effect to that promise of the Barbados Labour Party. But if I may, and of course it applies to the DLP, I thank you. But if we may speak historically about marijuana, cannabis, what you want to call it, I believe for several decades in Barbados and other countries in the Caribbean, it has been taboo. Not necessarily because of any knowledge that we had or research that was done, but because how it came about, the years of prohibition, and our neighbors to the north deciding that this substance, this ganja, marijuana, was a dangerous item, a narcotic drug that could affect people's sensorium. And coming out of the prohibition era, similar draconian measures were applied to cannabis and those who used it. But cannabis historically goes back to, I believe, as far back as 500 BC. And historically, it has been used in terms of culturally, I go as far back as I believe it was the Taoists in China, who thought it had remarkable properties and was part of their religion, and indeed the Hindus. And I don't know that honorable members are aware that in terms of the presence of cannabis in the Caribbean, it is attributed to the East Indian migrants who came here post-emancipation. And certainly the Hindus used it in their ceremonies, and they spoke of the importance of it in their Vedas and all of that. So here this was this substance which had been used for thousands of years. And coming to the Caribbean, where eventually in Jamaica and other countries, first of all, I believe it was Jamaica, Trinidad, Guyana, because of the numbers of East Indians who went there post-emancipation, that we had this development of, eventually in the 1930s, of Rastafari and the link and the music and all of that. And now it is associated, when we speak of the use of cannabis, we tend to associate it with Rastafarianism. And of course, in these days, there's Rastoids and there are fashion Rastas. But all of them are apparently under the same umbrella or the same tent, depending how you want to look at it and how it suits them at any particular point and time. So, but in terms of the government of Barbados, as I said earlier, we recognize the importance of it from a medicinal point of view. And for those who are trying to start rumors, we have made it clear when it comes to recreational use of marijuana that for this and things like this, there will be a need under the Barbados Labour Party for a referendum to deal with these. Clearly, there's the information as it relates to the use of cannabis in the treatment of certain neurological diseases. And I'm sure my colleague Senator Maynard would agree with this in terms of its usefulness in multiple sclerosis, in epilepsy, in Alzheimer's, in Parkinson's disease, and even in Tourette syndrome. And of course, I can say that as a student in Jamaica, whenever you had a cough, a cold, abdominal pain, someone would recommend ganja tea. I don't know if it had some effect on the smooth muscles of the gut or if it acted at a higher level in your brain, but certainly it worked in terms of assuaging the pain that you might have been experiencing. Those who are under chemotherapy that suffer with the nausea and the vomiting, again, ganja has been useful. And of course, in terms of chronic pain, cases of chronic pain where persons are suffering, again, it has been shown to be of tremendous importance and use in terms of pain. It has also helped people and is used as a substitution therapy for opioids. Not that that is a major problem in our side of the Caribbean Sea, but more so for our northern neighbors. And then, of course, the post-traumatic stress disorders and sleeping disorders. It has been shown that marijuana oil can be effective in these areas. So I think that it is clear that with science and investigation and research, that there is a role for the medicinal use of cannabis. I believe all honorable members are aware that there are certain constituents, chemical constituents within cannabis, and the one that we would be of interest in primarily in medicinal marijuana would be cannabidiol, as opposed to the tetrahydrocannabinol, which is the one that apparently has all of the effects on your motor system and how you feel. Indeed, in Barbados, the members of the Multiple Sclerosis Society have been asking for several years for the introduction of medical cannabis in Barbados. And I believe I've been told that since 2016, the Ministry of Health has been undertaking research on the possible use and introduction of this in terms of care and in terms of utilizing it in Barbados for these diseases. Mr. President, but we see in the government medical marijuana, not only a medical marijuana, as an opportunity also in terms of business and in terms, I remember Senator Drakes often speaks about growth as one of the ways in which we can utilize the marijuana industry, medical marijuana, as a means of doing this. Not only for the sake of doing it, and other countries all globally have moved towards creating businesses in medical marijuana. Certainly in Caribbean, some of our neighbors are sprinting ahead of us at this point in time. I believe it is Antigua, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Jamaica, have been making progress. But we feel that in terms of taking our time and getting the systems in place, that we in the future can be a sort of global hub in terms of the research and development of medicinal cannabis, and may even try to become a center of excellence for certain of these products in developing a Barbados brand, and certainly looking at increasing the possible foreign exchange earnings, recognizing that there are certain Canadian entities that are already interested in a process like this in Barbados. Of course, it can lead to employment generation opportunities and creation of economic empowerment for some Barbadians. We boast of having highly educated citizens, and certainly there are opportunities in terms of skills and technology transfer for Barbadians, which potentially could have wide applications in the agricultural sectors. We do research in terms of the soils and in terms of the varieties of plants. And of course, as it relates to health tourism and the opportunities in tourists, especially from the northern parts, in terms of having tourism, health tourism, families coming, people are recuperating and enjoying the benefits of medicinal cannabis while enjoying the atmosphere and the beaches and the serenity of Barbados. Mr. President, the industry is evolving rapidly, and obviously we want to create our niche, as the Senator Drakes is often seen in terms of development and in terms of trade that we need to carve out our own niche in this regard. Barbados is signatory to a number of United Nations conventions, but the important one, the 1961 Convention on Narcotic Drugs, and that lists cannabis as a controlled drug. It is felt that this convention allows the medical and scientific use of cannabis once it is strictly regulated. And in this regard, we are following these guidelines and going about establishing the process in which this can be developed in a specific way. It is understood that in the introduction of medicinal cannabis, it will be a strict space in which it will be introduced and controlled in Barbados, and will be directly supervised by the state. In terms of the particular requirements under this convention, it speaks of having adequate record keeping in terms of the quantities of medicinal cannabis to be utilized, the area and geographical location of the land to be used for cultivation of cannabis. And I know my colleague senator has about 50 acres in St. John. So I know that he might be very interested in using that. In terms of the quantities to be produced, quantities of imports and exports, and in terms of how medicinal cannabis is being disposed of. I don't know if Senator Maynard is becoming a bit agitated. Most importantly, however, the convention seek to prevent the diversion of medicinal cannabis for illicit purposes and for the prevention and misuse of this product. Hence these controls that are put into place. The convention requires that the medicinal cannabis will be done on the license, and this explains the need for the licensing regime which the bill speaks to. And essentially, the convention requires that all persons and enterprise involved in any aspect of the industry must be licensed, and also the premises. Mr. President, the bill obviously seeks to enable Barbados to successfully develop a vibrant industry that is in keeping with international obligations. Barbados aims, and we see ourselves in terms of standards and position ourselves as a provider of the highest quality medicinal cannabis. And we are therefore seeking to create an industry standards and the competencies, the relevant competencies for activities related to the cultivation, production, manufacture, trade, and research of cannabis products. I should say now that the convention provides that the medicinal cannabis should only be used if there's evidence that there's quality, safety, and efficacy for medical use. And these are all of the parameters that we are looking at. We return to the actual bill. It provides for the regulation of the handling of medicinal cannabis in Barbados, the establishment of a Barbados Medicinal Cannabis Licensing Authority, a Barbados Medicinal Cannabis Licensing Board, and a Barbados Medicinal Cannabis Appeals Tribunal. The bill also deals with the issuing of licenses and the handling of medicinal cannabis. As set out, it sets clear and specific guidelines for the handling of cannabis based on local and regional requirements. Mr. President, Part 2 outlines the response of the bill, the responsibilities, functions, and staffing of the Barbados Medicinal Cannabis Licensing Authority. And it also, Clause 4, outlines the functions of the authority in terms of developing policies, procedures, guidelines, and establishing the medicinal cannabis industry and ensuring that medicinal cannabis is available to patients in a safe and efficient manner. The authority will also regulate the handling of medicinal cannabis. And indeed, in terms of licenses, it will develop enforcement procedures in relation to the inspection of premises that are operated by licensees in order to ensure compliance. In addition, it will provide for the electronic tracking of the handling of medicinal cannabis, all in accordance with the proposed bill. It is expected that the board will establish a register of patients and the caregivers in accordance with the bill and the procedures to be followed. Mr. President, the bill also speaks in terms of the composition of the staff of the authority, in terms of its CEO, program administrator, etc. And it speaks at 22 in performing the board. It speaks of the board and how it will perform carry out its functions in terms of monitoring the administrative operations of the authority, advising the minister on matters of general policy, and ensuring that the authority receives and manages its funds in a prudent manner. And of course, do all such things that the board reasonably considers necessary, expedient for the purposes. It speaks also in part 4 in terms of the licensing supply of medicinal cannabis, and lists the categories of licenses that can be issued when all of this is in place. There's also in part 5 discussion on the Medicinal Cannabis Appeals Tribunal, and it speaks to the offenses at part 6, and then we look at the schedules. Mr. President, of course there are some issues which will have to be addressed, and I believe those members, those are my colleagues who participated in the Joint Select Committee, which was established to look at this draft bill initially, will speak in more details in terms of the issues raised, etc. I note that the issue of the use of the sacramental use of cannabis, I believe, was raised at in terms of the Select Committee. This is a matter that came out of that. And as I said, this is now, we're looking at a cognate debate that covers the sacramental use of cannabis for religious purposes. Suffice it to say that I mentioned earlier, historically, the use for religious purposes. And the Rastafarians have established it as part of a sacrament within their ceremonies, and they are also seeking under the Constitution in terms of their rights, in terms of rights to religion, to be able to practice and to utilize their religious sacraments without any hindrance. And that bill also deals with that in detail. Mr. President, I said I was not going to be quite long, and with those few words, I beg to move that the medicinal cannabis bill be now read a second time. I'm obliged to you.
Senator Franklin, please.
Thank you, sir.
Good, Tiger.
Sir, I don't know where to start. There are so many things wrong here, and even though the Dems wanted to use marijuana to get back in, that didn't work. And your attempt to use marijuana, and you meaning the government and not the president, to use marijuana to secure a next term in office, sir, that too will not work. I was surprised at the haste in which this first the medicinal cannabis industry bill came through. As a matter of fact, it had so many iterations. It was the medical marijuana, the medical cannabis. It had about 5 or 6 changes because you weren't able to settle on anyone. You were rushing so fast, you didn't know what you were doing. My problem, sir, is that, let's start from the beginning. I well remember, within days of this administration being formed, the person who was appointed Minister of Agriculture, his first speech, he ain't talking anything about agriculture, and he's talking about legalizing this marijuana, this medical marijuana, for these people who need it for whatever else. And I'm saying, why would the Minister of Agriculture be so upfront with a medical issue? Something got to be wrong here, you know. I smell a rat, sir. So I said, look, something wrong. So I started to pay attention to it. Yeah. His first speech as a minister of the crown was to deal with somebody else's portfolio. Because as far as I'm concerned, sir, medical suggests Ministry of Health. And unless you're dealing with veterinary health, that is the only time you will be dealing with the Ministry of Agriculture. But the Ministry of Agriculture, they seem to have had this urgent need to get this thing on the books. And it bothered me. Then we hear it went to the House. And the House sent it to us as a select committee, joint select committee of both this place and the other place. I remember in the House they said that you should have 4 senators. And I well remember when we formed another joint committee, the AG or no less a person said you must have 6 people from the Senate. We had 4. I raised it here with the clerk, and then I raised it at the first sitting of the Joint Select Committee. And I took legal advice on it. And I can assure you, it was from a very eminent person who also sat in these chambers, who assured me that the House can't tell us who to put on a Joint Select Committee, that the standing order says they must have 6, we must have 6. We had 4. But then there was no coming back to the Senate because we want to get this thing passed in the recess. But here goes the problem, sir. I was named as a member of this Joint Select Committee. And on the first day when we were supposed to meet to go through the preliminaries to find out how we are going to proceed, if we're going to call witnesses, what we're going to do, I turned up to see a sea of people outside there waiting. So at first I thought maybe there was some other convention going on at the Lloyd's Erskine Sanford Center, because it couldn't be for us, because we have not settled on if we're going to call people or anything yet. Then I heard, after we elected the chairman, then I heard him say that we have people outside waiting to make presentations. I said, hold on a minute. Who invited them? It couldn't be you, because you just appointed chairman, so you couldn't have called anybody yet. And we certainly, as a committee, as a joint select committee, did not give anybody permission to do anything, to call in witnesses, to get submissions from anybody, because that is what we would have done in the first session. They made the clerk fall on his sword to say that it was him who invited these people. I'm still not satisfied, but I took the answer, what it is. The chairman and the attorney general said, oh, that it was the clerk. And they complimented the clerk for being so efficient. People came in and they talked during the day. I listened. I asked questions. And one fellow in particular, he made a very good presentation. At the end of the day, I went outside and I saw him, and I complimented him on his presentation. And he said to me, he didn't write anything because the minister only called him last night and asked you to come. I said, are you telling me? But the minister said he had nothing to do with this, you don't want you to come in. The following day, I went back to the Joint Select Committee and I asked the chairman to resign, because lying to a Joint Select Committee is lying to Parliament. He did all kinds of fancy things, shout at me, I shout back at him and all kinds of stuff. But the fact remains that the chairman misled the Joint Select Committee by inviting people and then claimed he didn't know. And he cannot say that, not him, because the same fellow put it on his Facebook page because he was so proud that the minister would have called him during the night and asked him to come and make a presentation. It was a rush job. And he selected various people to come to give the evidence that they wanted, or that the government want to justify this medicinal marijuana thing. Sir, none of what I told you, sir, is in the minutes or in the report of the Joint Select Committee. That is why you did not see my signature on it, because it was a fraudulent document. It is not true. It missed a lot of information. Yes, sir, it is very serious. What they omitted, if there was something as such that I or anybody would ask the chairman to resign because he lied to Parliament, and that could not feature in the report of the Joint Select Committee, something is wrong. Because that is a very serious allegation to make against any minister. Ministers in the Commonwealth have been known to resign their office on an accusation that they lied to Parliament.
Mr. President, on the point of order, I believe the Joint Committee was comprised of members of Parliament of Barbados. And for this honorable member to stand up in this chamber and describe a body of work produced by honorable members of Parliament as being fraudulent is indeed a reflection on all of us. And I believe he should be asked to withdraw those remarks immediately.
Mr. President, I just gave you the factual outline of what transpired. And I said here that the minister, either the minister is...
Mr. President, the honorable member also reflected on members of this Senate and describing a work that they were involved in as fraudulent. That is a serious allegation.
Senator Franklin, I'm disposed to strike the words from the record.
Sir, if that is your wish, it is your wish. But I can say, sir, that the document was not an accurate reflection of what transpired at the Joint Select Committee. We cannot have something as serious as an allegation of a minister lying to Parliament, lying to a Joint Select Committee, and it did not, and it was not reflected in the minutes or in the report from that committee. That is a very serious allegation, sir. And I would not make it lightly. I will not.
Mr. President, the honorable member is continuing. He's referring to a minister as lying to the committee. I mean, again, that is an extremely serious allegation. And he should be asked to remove it.
Sir.
Your attention to standing orders, 34, the content of speeches. Shall be out of order to use offensive and insulting language about members of either house. No senator shall impute improper motives to any member of either house.
Sir, I am aware of the standing order. I said then, and I will say it again, that this is what I said at the Joint Select Committee. I am reporting to you what transpired at the Joint Select Committee. I am making no allegations here. I'm only telling you what transpired at the Joint Select Committee that was not reflected in the minutes. That is all I'm saying. I'm not calling anybody a liar, no. I'm not calling anybody evil, no. I'm not calling anybody anything. I am saying to you, sir, that these things happened at the Joint Select Committee and it was not reflected in the minutes that was given to us, and it was not reflected in the report. I ain't calling nobody anything, no. I am just reporting to you what transpired.
Of the Joint Select Committee as a fraudulent document.
Sir, and that was withdrawn.
Which is not, I did not hear that.
So, you struck it. So,
No. I said I was disposed to strike it.
Oh, I thought you
But
did.
you went on to elaborate. I don't want to make it explicitly clear that I have struck those words from the record.
So, sir, I bow to your wishes. Sir, and I am saying to you, sir,
I
in
would
compliance.
suggest that you should now proceed to try to justify your earlier use of the words which were struck from the record.
So I have not
Try now to
justified
justify
anything,
them.
sir. All I'm saying is these things happen, and it was not reflected in the minutes. And that is a problem that I have. And I'm saying that is why I did not sign the report. That is all I'm saying. This bill, sir, or these two bills, are payback. The government of Barbados, when in opposition, utilized the services of a lot of people to get elected. Those people, some of them were the criminal element.
Mr. President, I think we are used to this kind of behavior, but at some point, Mr. President, we have to take a stand and say it has gone too far. Senator Franklin has just said that this government engaged with the criminal element, and I wish to have those sentiments withdrawn from the record.
Sir?
I am disposed to strike that too.
Sir, at the state opening of Parliament, I was here, and some of the invitees, especially with invitation cards in their hand, and I heard the police officers that was here to protect us complaining that these were the criminal element that had special invitations from people from the government. They didn't get any from me. They didn't get any from Reverend Adderley. And Senator Dress was not here yet. So those people, those criminal people, and they were complaining. They were saying, and I, of course, now I hear them talking, so I stopped and let what they were saying wash across my ears. And they were saying that, imagine we have to go and catch these people doing photos like them and then to bring them in here too.
Mr. President, I rise again on a point of order. Mr. President, we are here for the purpose of engaging in a cognate debate on medicinal cannabis and the sacramental use of cannabis. And I would wish to have Senator Franklin say to us what is the relevance of referring to criminal elements in the context of this particular discussion. It sounds as though he's cast aspersions on persons' character, and I would wish to have them withdrawn again, Mr. President.
I am not casting aspersions on those criminal elements. The police.
You're suggesting that those members that you're referring to got invitations from some members of Parliament?
Sir, 34-5, no. Senators are not in problem what is to any member of either house. Sir, I am not going against this. I'm not imputing the problem what is. I am saying that these people were invited, and they were invited because they assisted the government in getting elected. And no, sir, it is my belief that these bills are payback. They're too rushed. They're not thought out properly, and they are not. But you remember you gave the people who financed you wrote off their taxes and stuff. So now these people have to get their dues too. You know? So we rush ahead, and we get these things done to suit this indecent haste. Something is wrong. You were wrong at the Joint Select Committee, but you couldn't wait to get back to Parliament. Parliament was in recess. You could have said, no, let's do this and do it right. You rush it through. You force it through to make sure that these bills, mind you, it was this bill first, the medical marijuana one, and then after the Rasta community said, well, how come we ain't getting our medical thing? You rushed and you did a sacramental marijuana, a sacramental cannabis bill too. That too was not thought out properly. Because I'll give you a joke about the two bills. I'm not going to get all the sequence, but just to show you what I'm talking about. You know, if you use medical marijuana or medical cannabis and you do not have a prescription or a recommendation from a doctor or whoever else is authorized to issue these things, you can be fined $100,000 and 10 years in jail. All right? They're still here and doing it before Parliament. However, if you use the Sacramento one, you go and smoke that when you don't have a permit to use it, it's $10,000. So anytime the police catch a fellow smoking marijuana, he can say, oh, sir, this is the Sacramento one, this is the medical one. This is something as stupid as that. People, you have a situation where you got marijuana. I understand there are about Israel has identified about 500 species of cannabis. So I don't know if there's one called Sacramento and one called medical. I know that depending on which species you're using, they might have more of one element in it than the other. But how do we know? How do we know when you see a marijuana bush out there growing? Which species is it? Is it the one that you can use for the medical marijuana that takes out the various substances? Because look, let me tell you something, you see. I am not saying that marijuana is bad for you or good for you. Because there is enough anecdotal evidence to suggest that people have been helped by using some extract, or in some people who were terminal or somebody easy pain or whatever. I heard all of that. I understand all of that. I am saying to you, sir, that enough research has not gone into it for anybody to rush out there and say it is safe. I remember when I said that at the Joint Select Committee meeting, a person approached me and he told me after, he said, let me tell you something. This is a God-given product. You know, God, this is a natural herb. Come here from God and from whatever else. And I said, sir, every herb that God provided, you're not required to smoke it. Because manchineel is also God-given, but they don't see you smoking that. You know? The problem here, sir, is that there are lots of herbs. Let's take, for instance, the neem. The neem has been used all over India for eons. As a matter of fact, this smooth skin thing, I think, might be attributed to some neem soap. When I could find it. You're not saying all of it, just a little bit that just left out. But there is neem soap. But the people use some extract of the neem. And they bury it. I know of people who use it in the tea, and they refuse to take the medication given to the doctor to lower their blood sugar. And when they go back to the doctor, the blood sugar is down, no, but the liver is big. It destroys the liver. I almost lost a friend like that. Doctors caught him in time. Big fatty liver because of the neem that he was boiling the tea and drinking. Mind you, blood sugar low though. The problem here, sir, is that there is not enough research because organic farmers take the same neem bush, put it in water for a little while, and then spray cabbage and kill all the white flies that bother the cabbage. You got good, healthy cabbage about the place. So we have a situation where there is not enough research with the marijuana or any of those other substances that I'm talking about, but we rush ahead using it. And why we didn't have all the research on marijuana, for most of my life, it was an offense to have or to use marijuana, so there wasn't a lot that you can get about the place to research on. Now, if you want to do the research, don't experiment on people and then do the research later. Because I have enough anecdotal evidence to suggest that a lot of people who use cannabis end up down in the psychiatric hospital. A lot of them do. A lot don't. And as I tell you, look, I took this thing very seriously. I read about more marijuana and cannabis than I've read about anything else since I've been in the Senate. I watched everything I could on YouTube. I read articles. I did everything. And there's one consistent thing that I've found. Yes, they're saying they're a good product. It is good in some instances. It's about also, if your family is predisposed to psychosis, and you use cannabis, you too might end up psychotic. Because it's something that runs in the family. I don't know all the medical terms and that kind of stuff. But again, psychosis or being mad is not something that families were proud of. So if you had an old aunt, your father had a sister that used to go off and things, she ain't gonna tell you. So you wouldn't know. So when you now don't know that there's psychosis in your family, and you go and experiment with the cannabis, you end up at the psychiatric hospital. Thankfully, sir, I can use it. There's no psychosis in my family. But I don't see the need. It have to be way back. I have my family tree researched all the way back in 1834, and there are no mad people there. But what I'm saying to you, sir, is this product, this drug, is too harmful to be used willy-nilly. Now, if you have a person, as I said earlier, who is in pain and nothing else is working, anything, I ain't got no problem with that. I have absolutely no problem with that. I have a problem with young people getting high. Of course, I'm still young. That is the problem, you know. I hear people saying it opens your mind. I don't know what that means. But we have situations where you go down the road and you can smell this thing. I remember the first time I knew what it was. It was my training as an immigration officer. They brought some of it into the room and they lit it. And I said, I know that smell. Because that's the smell I used to smell when they passed in the block, the fella set it down. I didn't know at the time, and that was 1980. See, I have lived a very sheltered life. And so a lot of those things have escaped me. You know, just like I didn't know the drug lords that came here, I knew none of them. Because I'm sheltered. Mommy's boy. Right? So, you know? No, she's not a mommy's boy. So I don't have a difficulty with people researching and removing the good stuff from the cannabis plant and using it for medical purposes. But when you take that good stuff and the bad stuff combined in that leaf, right? And then you light it up. You are smoking the good stuff and you are smoking the bad stuff all in one leaf. Now, if you can separate the good from the bad and use the good, I have no problem at all. And if it is about researching and coming up with something to the benefit of mankind, I am in for it. You know, my problem here, sir, is that we are not ready. We are starting a medical research industry, and our first thing is marijuana. I remember years ago, there was some discovery in Australia that, well, they didn't call it discovery, just how Columbus discovered the West Indies. They discovered in Australia that cassava has some enzyme in it that fights cancer. That the old people in Barbados already knew, mind you. But they discovered this. Now we got a lot of cassava out here. Why didn't we go into the medical cassava industry? You know? Why not? Because they got a lot of cancers in Barbados. we rush to get high. That is the problem. I said, meet the people of Barbados, the government of Barbados. We rush to get high. This government, and also you're into this, you want to make money, but you cannot make, you should not want to make money on the hands or to the detriment of a section of the community, those who are predisposed to psychosis. You shouldn't want to make money on them, you know? That's called drug trafficking.
Is it?
You know, when you, they don't care how you sell drugs. You know, the druggies, there's only mark care when you see fella go too far down and then sell the people to get you off the street, man, he make you look bad. But, no, yes, you know, they sell drugs until the fella look too bad because they don't want anybody to see him. They don't want anybody to see him on the street knowing that he takes drugs. So this government now will allow people to use this stuff, and then when they get too bad, what's going to happen? Become a charge on the government because they're going to let us to go? I have serious concerns about this bill. These two bills. Let me concern myself now a bit about the sacramental thing. You know, again, I do not want to tell anybody that his religion is nonsense, or he cannot observe his religion, because I know religions where people think that the cow is sacred. People think that whatever they want to think about. So I am not saying to any Rastafarian or anybody else that your religion is insensible to you or anything like that. I thought I was talking earlier, and I said to them, my thing is, I'm not one of those people who run out and jump up and keep noise and praying in the streets and stuff. But I believe in God, and I believe that but it's, you know, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no man cometh unto me, unto the Father, but by me. Right? No one cometh to the Father, but by me. That is my belief. That is my belief. All right? So I do not want to say that somebody else can't have some other belief. All right? That is mine. Don't ask me why I believe it. That's how I come along, and I have that by faith. I believe that. But, sir, this bill is seeking to put cannabis in the hands of the Rastafarian community, some of whom legally, put legally in the hands of the Rastafarian community, and they're calling it a sacrament. You know? And let me just get the bill here. The bill defines sacrament. No, dear, it's taking a while. And it's at section 2 of the bill, it defines sacrament. Sacrament means an item, thing, or object which is venerated or revered as it is believed to be vital or essential to the practice of the religion. My belief, or what I was taught when I was a little boy, and I was trying to remember what it was, it says, thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, or the likeness of anything that is in the heavens above, or in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down to it or worship it. You find that somewhere in the commandments. One or two of them, I don't know which one it is. No, I haven't read them so long. But, sir, we are now saying to the Rasta community that they can have a graven image. They says a thing or an object. A thing or an object in a sacrament. But this bill was rushed to the point where you had to get something in place quick. and you didn't think out the process. Just like the one I talked about earlier with, it is, you can smoke the sacramental one, and you only got to pay $10,000 the police get you if you're not using it in the facility, in your temple. But if you use the medical one, you pay $100,000 if the police get you. These are things that should have been worked out. Also, sir, what I'm concerned about is that is a temple, they call it? The Rastafarian temples, you can grow your marijuana to smoke on the premises. That's in the hills. You know, I don't understand that. You know, you can have your own stuff growing in the yard at the church or at the temple. You know what happened? The fellow who is not Rasta, who don't worship, but who want to get high, getting in there for it, you know. Unless you're going to have armed people protecting your stash, this bill is going to put the Rastafarian community in trouble. You put them up to get killed by the criminal element who want that stuff. Because this is for sale, not by the Rastas, but by the people who will steal it and sell it. This bill isn't thought out properly. They rush it too fast. And it says here, a permit granted under section 4.2 grants permission for the cultivation, harvesting of cannabis on the premises of the place of worship. You know, I have a problem with that. You know, I have a serious problem with that. What will happen now? Every fellow who wants to smoke this stuff going to establish a little temple and apply to the minister for permission. And you got the fastest growing religion in Barbados after this bill is passed will be Rastafari. Not because they believe in the Rastafarian philosophy or anything like that, because they want to get high. And who is to say that my worship is not faithful and honest? So we can do a test. But everybody set up a little church and preach and get the 10% or the tithes or whatever they do. So you can't stop them, because you cannot stop their free expression of their faith. So if I put up my little thing and you can tell me, no, you get the big Rasta temple down there permission, but you don't give my small one who only got 50 people permission. This is, you will have so many of them spreading on the place and it's funny. You know? I was looking for a town with locks today to wear in this debate, but I couldn't find one at such short notice, because I could set up a church, a temple. You see, this is not thought of. That might sound funny to you, but this is reality. You know, this is reasonably foreseeable. Where the growth in that religion will be exponential. And you can't do them anything, because you have just made it legal. But if you are making it legal, why must you say to those people, if smoking or using the herb, I don't know how you use it, is part of your religious observance, but it would be against the law to let minors observe the religion, because the minors can't take the sacrament, and it is an offense to do so. If you allow minors, according to this legislation, section 14, think it's section, clause 14. I don't want to mislead the Senate, so let me, no, I'm not used to misleading the Senate. I don't want to start no. It says here, no person shall, A, B, C, D, permit or allow a minor to use cannabis as a sacrament. Look at there. When you go to church and you go to confirmation classes and stuff, and then you get, what is it called, confirmed. They do that when you're in primary school. And then you could go and get the bread and the wine that they serve. And you are 12, 13 years old. Why is it right and lawful that the Church of the Catholic persuasion, Catholic meaning the entire Catholic Church, not only the Roman Catholic, but the entire Catholic Church, why can't they give their sacrament to their youngsters, but the Rastas under pain of punishment of a $10,000 fine or 2 years in jail or both, cannot allow their children to participate in using the sacrament? Something is wrong with that. You know what is wrong with it? You have to go down further into the act. No, is it further? No, it's further up. Where it suggests that the minister may suspend or revoke any permit granted under this act in the interest of public safety, public health, or public morality. So if this thing is a sacrament, why is there a public health issue dealing with your worship? Because you know that this thing can be Russian roulette. You can put the bullet in the barrel and the chamber and spin it and fire, and nothing happens. And then you spin again, and there's a funeral the next week. Same thing with this medical marijuana or medicinal marijuana or any other marijuana, because it is good to some, but harmful to others. That is why, sir, I am saying to you, we must be careful what we do, because we will end up with a nation of zombies, or too many. Because let me tell you something, see? The United States, they can allow the use of marijuana around the place, and if they lose 3 million people, then that's only 300 million, you know? We can't lose 300,000. We don't have that much. So everything that happens outside of Barbados, we don't have to try to apply it here. Because if there's an accident in Barbados and 15 people get killed in that accident, everybody in Barbados don't want them. You know? So you will be giving cannabis to a nation. It might help some, but it will hurt many. The government needs to step back and do the research first. We cannot afford to do the research after the fact. This is too dangerous. Yes, use it as your sacrament. Use it for the medical purposes. But there are other purposes, other harmful effects of this drug, this plant, this herb, that we running fast and try not to realize that it exists. You know, so, as I said earlier, sir, I am not hard and fast about the use of it. I'm just worried about the pace of the implementation. Because I understand this, it has good properties. Also, let me switch now to something else. You wonder why I believe that the government is more interested in getting this thing to people to smoke than any medical or any sacramental thing? Under the medical cannabis industry bill, there is a provision for a therapeutic facility. That therapeutic facility is a place where the minister can, like, let's say you have a drugstore. You can have a little area set aside where you can go and take your medicine, where you can go and smoke the stuff. I don't understand.
On a point of order, the honorable senators with leading the House, it was made clear, both in the other place and in the media and where have you, that smoking would not be included in this particular bill. The idea of smoking cannabis is not being considered in this bill. Even these so-called spas and therapeutic spas and clinics, you cannot smoke. So to say that in here, Mr. President, is basically misleading the House.
So just bringing a reason and a point of order, you know, you must not make a speech in any event if indeed you thought that Honorable Senator Franklin was inaccurate or misleading. You will have the opportunity when you speak at number 6.
Thank you, Mr. President. I let you know. Yeah. Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, sorry. We are being told that people who have these spasms and whatever else, they're having, you know, epileptics and Tourette's and stuff, that they smoke this stuff and they get relief. This is what I'm making up. This is what I saw on YouTube. This is what I read about in articles. As a matter of fact, The Guardian today got one article about it. Yeah? Trinidad. You know? And it has warned about the dangers. But of course, if I can't quote the nation, I can't quote The Guardian either. So I will not do so. But, sir, the way to apply this to get the effects is to smoke it. For some people. Some people, when you get the CDB or whatever you call it, when you synthesize it out and use it, and you can use it in whatever form you use it, either injectable or swallow it or whatever, I don't know. That's another form. But so why would, if you are not smoking it, why would you have to have a place set aside to take a tablet? That would make no sense to me. I go to Flanders, the drugstore above here, and I get my medication. I don't go in the corner and take some. I carry home. You know? Therapeutic facility under the Section 2 of the Medical Cannabis Bill, therapeutic facility. Therapeutic facility means a premises granted a retail distributor license to sell, dispense, or provide medical cannabis prescribed or recommended by a medical practitioner, and provide facilities and other medicinal or therapeutic requirements to allow the patient who has purchased, prescribed, or recommended medical cannabis to use or consume that medical cannabis there for therapeutic purposes. Now, if it weren't someplace to smoke this marijuana, if it wasn't a smokehouse that you are intended to create, you would give the fellow the tablets, he would go home and take them. You don't normally take your medication in the drugstore. But, sir, it says your premises. So the thing to do now, sir, is to look and see what the word premises mean in this legislation. And it says, premises means any land or building as well as any vehicle or receptacle located on such land or in any such building. So, I can have my mobile smoking unit. Besides, it can be a vehicle. This legislation contemplates having a vehicle where you can park your vehicle on this particular piece of land and smoke. This is what I raised it, and nobody think I was serious, but this is what it says in the legislation. It says any land or building as well as any vehicle. Vehicle is a car, Suzuki van, or whatever else.
Mr. President, on a point of order, Senator Franklin is misleading the House. The definition of premises in the form that he has made reference to is in a version of the bill dated August 2019. The final bill that was produced after the committee finalized the report is dated October 10th, and the definition of premises has been changed to exclude vehicles and all of the things that he's making reference to.
Mr. President, I am reading from Parliament's website. The bill that is before the Senate. I just pull it up here just now. And I am reading the one that is here before the House, before this House. That is the confusion.
Mr. President, sir, on a point of order, there's a final report. There's a report.
I have you down here as speaking.
I'm sorry.
You will have every
Mr. President, I'm so sorry, Mr. President. What did I say?
No point of order. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, sir. Sir, I am saying, Mr. Acting Deputy President, I have been accused of misleading this House. And if I have been misleading the House, sir, it is the House that has been misleading me. Because I am reading from the bill that is before this House, so says Parliament's website. So if you have one that you didn't...
Mr. Deputy President, sir, on a point of order, there is a final report produced by the same committee that Senator Franklin sat on with a final bill, which I would hope that he had made himself available of, regardless of what is on Parliament's website.
I am not aware of any of those changes you're talking about. I am aware of the one that we have here to pass. Because this is the one that the public sees, this is the one that is before this House. Now, I'm grateful to find out that you remove...
Mr. Chairman, on the point of order, I believe that Senator Franklin is misleading this House. Senator Franklin well knows that there's a circulation by the Clerk of Parliament of the latest legislation. And therefore, for Senator Franklin to suggest that what is on Parliament's website is what is before this chamber is incorrect. And he must not, sir, mislead this chamber.
Mr. Chairman, sir, I am so nice that I will not even call that foolishness. I am reading from the email sent to me. You don't circulate paper documents anymore. Yeah, but it's here. It's on both. No, both. Right. So I am not. That's what you got to get. The government got to get its act together. So when it comes here, it is what is the intended version to be passed. Because you know we've done several times where we pass the wrong thing. All I'm saying to you, sir, is we have, or this government has, put in place a regime where you can smoke your stuff at a therapeutic facility, and a therapeutic facility could be a little place in the pharmacy, but no, you can't have smoking in the general area. So it would have to be a place set aside for you to smoke your stuff. This is what I am talking about when I say that government is rushing to do things and they are not taking the time out to look at the consequences. They just want this thing passed. They want this thing passed to suit whoever, or who is the puppet master, who is the operative person behind pulling the strings. One former member of the other place called them the white shadows. But these might be black shadows this time, but they're the people behind directing the show. So we have to get our marijuana out. We are not thinking. You know, look, under the new dispensation with the medical cannabis industry thing, people are going to have areas where they can grow this stuff. And we are supposed to find out from the government, after we pass this legislation, how you propose to regulate all this thing. You know? This act is not accompanied by any proposed regulations. We are going to trust this government. You can do that. I don't. To do the right thing, to put everything in place without sight of this house or the other place. You can pass this skeletal framework here, and then you will put regulations in place. Now, sir, I would have been willing to concede if the regulations were going to be subject to affirmative resolution, but they are not. And for those of you who haven't read the standing orders yet and keep interrupting me, affirmative resolution is where you bring the regulation or whatever you want, or the order before both houses to be passed before they come into law. Negative resolution is where the minister makes the regulation and it is law. And then it is laid in the house. And you see where the minister gets up and he says he laid this order, this, the next order stuff. Those orders, if they are subject to negative resolution, they are law there and then. And if we don't see the resolutions or the orders or whatever, and we do not object to them, within 40 days, it is good law. And that is it. So we don't, it becomes law, and you have 40 days in which to vote it down. But it's already law. I am saying to you, this house, that for something as serious as this medical cannabis bill, you don't do this footloose and fancy-free kind of legislating, and you're going to have regulations for all manner of things, for licensing, for use, for everything else, and don't tell anybody in Barbados what they are. You sneak it in on the public, and then if it is like how the last government has behaved, the orders don't get here in time or at all. Because I well remember, and I'm speaking about the last administration, where the minister, under the Duties, Taxes, and Other Payments Exemption Act, has the power to waive any tax or any duty or whatever, however you call it. He waived the duty on some Mercedes-Benz for the hired people, the marketing manager and somebody else get the place in Bel, they only get my friend out the place last week, but they already get Mercedes-Benz. Laid it in the house, and has not been laid in the house yet. They did it when the house was prorogued or dissolved. It was dissolved. And that order has not gotten here to this day for anybody here to vote it down. So, as far as I'm concerned, it is good law until voted down. And that is the situation that we can have with these regulations, that the government refusing to let anybody know what they're going to have in the regulations. I don't think the people of Barbados voted for this secret legislation, or for government to come and implement something as serious as this and don't tell the people who they are supposed to be governing. They're governing in our names. But you're doing things in our names and not telling us what you are doing. Now you want to pass this thing and pass this legislation and then put regulations in place and don't let nobody know what these regulations are. I have a serious difficulty with that. It is wrong, sir. But you have 29 seats. And you could do whatever you like. But when the time comes, you know, people will judge you on your behavior. So be bullies now.
All of us.
Be bullies now. So when you're running for the Ronald seat, they're going to remember you doing here, you know. So, you're running? You know? So you must behave with a measure of honor and decency, and not abuse the power that the people put in your hands, because it is transitory. You can have it today, and tomorrow you lose it. But your tomorrow is in 4 years or 3.5 years now, because much was given to you and much is expected of you. But you are working in a way that is contrary to what the people of this country expected of you. They gave you much, but you are abusing this much. And you want to put legislation in place, put regulations in place, and don't tell nobody what it's all about. No, that's not fair. You can do it. You have the power. But when you are on the outside looking in, you would consider that what you have done. You will have a lot of time. I remember my headmaster used to say, act in haste, repent at leisure. And that is what you will do. Remember those words, Mr. Acting President? Act in haste. Repent at leisure. You can got a long time to repent your behavior if you don't step back and do the right thing. This is not the right thing. Rushing these bills through Parliament is not the right thing. Giving the impression that you want to have a medical marijuana industry is a ruse. Let me make sure I've covered every one of my things on, Mr. President. I have a lot of notes, but yes, I did that. So I think I've covered most of what I wanted to say. But, sir, please, if this administration has any sense, it would listen to not what only I am saying, but what the Rastafarian community, the ones that you did not consult, are saying, because they're not happy with this sacramental thing, you know. They're not happy with it. A few might be happy, and a few people posing to be Rastafari, who want to pretend that they're Rastafari for the purposes of smoking, they're happy. Because locks do not make you a Rastafarian. You know? You know? And we rush off and we went and we did the wrong thing. Not necessarily we meaning the government. Pull up. Take time to do these things properly, or not we will suffer the consequences. Just the highlight, the first one I made with the $10,000 smoking medical marijuana, or $100,000, $100,000 if you smoke the medical one, or $10,000 if you smoke the sacramental one, without having the necessary permissions, don't make sense. You know, but you know why it ends up here? Because you didn't take the time out to compare the two and see what you were doing. You're just rushing. Because this sacramental marijuana bill, a sacramental cannabis bill, came to the House Thursday last week, and you passed it Friday. Yes, sir. I am finished for the time being, but you are not finished. If you think you're finished, you might be done if you don't behave yourself and treat the people of Barbados with respect. Thank you, Mr. Acting Deputy President.
Oh, Rogers.
We next recognize Senator Rogers as the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I rise to share in this debate, this cognate debate on the medical cannabis bill, as well as the sacramental cannabis bill. Quite aware that we are dealing with a matter that has been taboo in our society for a very long time. And I'm sure persons will be very eager to hear how this particular chamber deals with this bill. I believe it is the responsibility of every government to seek upward mobility for its people and economic growth for its jurisdiction by means that would help persons in that jurisdiction to experience a better life. And to that end, I wish to commend the government on the work they've been doing thus far. But it is also the responsibility of every government that considers itself responsible to pursue that upward mobility and economic growth and ensure that it is not wrought at the expense of any of its citizens. It is against this backdrop I wish to lend my voice to this medicinal cannabis bill and the sacramental cannabis bill. We are aware that we are in a time in our world where cannabis is being touted as one of the fastest growing industries at this time. Some persons put it at over 11 hundreds of billions of dollars. And I understand the necessity for the government to look in this direction if it's going to pursue upward mobility for its people. But I also am very concerned about some words that have been bandied about in the other place and some terms that I heard today as well surrounding this cannabis bill as we've been debating it. And one of them is the synthesizing of these two things where persons are using interchangeably the term the medicinal cannabis bill and the medicinal marijuana bill. And I'm very, very concerned about the interchangeability of those words because words have meaning. What I wish to point out first are some terms within the bill that, for me, raise some questions. And the first one has to do with the definition of a young person on page 11 under the interpretation of the bill. A young person means a person who is a patient and who is under the age of 21. We accept that. And then on page 22, under the use of medicinal cannabis, section 25(2), it says a parent or guardian of a patient who is a minor or a young person must obtain a certificate for them to receive treatment. But then there's another term that is used in the bill, young persons under 18 or young persons over 18. Is it to say that these young persons over 18 do not fall into the category of those who are receiving treatment or who are patients of medicinal marijuana, and that's not spelled out? Because what happens later on when we come to caregivers, on page 23 under section 28(5), a person who is under the age of 18 years shall not be designated a caregiver. But remember, a young person is a person under 21 who has to get permission from their parents to get treated for medicinal marijuana. So can this young person then be a caregiver? In addition to that, when we go to section 32(1), it really spells out the importance of why we need to define who this young person 18 or over is. Because this young person can apply for a license for medicinal marijuana and get it at 18 years. But yet, to be treated under 21, you have to have permission from your parents. And at the same time, you can be a caregiver who is giving persons this medicinal marijuana. So I think these terms need to be clearly spelled out in the bill. But that's not my substantive point with this bill, sir. My substantive point is, as I mentioned earlier, the interchangeability that we've heard in both chambers about medicinal cannabis and medicinal marijuana. All marijuana is cannabis, but not all cannabis is marijuana. All marijuana is cannabis, but not all cannabis is marijuana. And this is where I think we need to focus in this bill, and this is where it is not clearly spelled out in this bill. Because the definition for cannabis on page 8 is too broad. If we're talking about a medicinal cannabis industry, the definition for cannabis needs not be this broad. What do I mean by this, sir? The plant Cannabici of the family Cannabici, genus Cannabis, species Sativa, has 3 subspecies. There's Cannabis sativa sativa, there's Cannabis sativa indica, and Cannabis sativa ruderalis. Ruderalis we do not really pay attention to because some persons are actually questioning whether it's actually a part of the genus sativa or whether it belongs to something else. So we don't pay attention to that. The two of importance are cannabis sativa sativa and cannabis sativa indica. What differentiates these two things are the levels of delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol they contain. Cannabis sativa sativa contains about 0.2 to 0.3% tetrahydrocannabinol. Cannabis sativa indica can contain at least 20 to 30%, which is 10,000% more, 100 times more. What is this tetrahydrocannabinol? Cannabis has lots of constituents and over 70 elements which we refer to as cannabinoids. The two that we know most about and the two that seem more pertinent for this discussion are delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, which we call THC, and cannabidiol, which we call CBD. Recently, studies have been showing another one that may be useful, CBN cabinol, which is really when tetrahydrocannabinol breaks down. It forms this thing that could be useful. When we talk about medicinal cannabis, the medicinal aspect of cannabis is CBD, cannabidiol, not THC. THC is the psychoactive aspect of cannabis. And this psychoactive aspect, based on studies that were done in the late 80s, early 90s, they recognize that these two products, the CBD and the CDB, interact with what we call the CB1 and CB2 receptors in our body. THC reacts directly with CB1, which can be found in the hippocampus of the brain. The hippocampus of the brain is the area of the brain that deals with our cognitive skills, our memories, emotions, etc. And what it has shown is that high concentrations of tetrahydrocannabinol, when they interact with the CB1 receptors, they prevent the forming of memories. Cannabidiol, on the other hand, seems to be an inhibitor to the activity of THC and interacts with what we refer to as the CB2 receptors in the body, which can be found throughout the body. And these are the ones that deal with muscle relaxation, etc. In cannabis sativa sativa, which contains a THC level of 0.2 to 0.3%, it has been found that that does not cause the euphoria and does not cause the type of effect on the hippocampus as the other strain, indica, which has the higher levels THC. In fact, it is said that cannabis sativa sativa cannot get you high. You do not experience a high using that. So within the US, based on your etymology of where the word marijuana comes from, some go into the East and say it comes from the old Chinese and Taiwanese names for ma'adama. But in the US in particular, marijuana is actually a derogatory term. When the Mexicans came across the border in the early 1900s, acting strangely because they were using something called loco weed or reefer, which we get the term reefer madness. That is when the Americans realized there's something wrong here. And over time, what has happened, they put a ban on everything that had to do with cannabis. But later on, they've recognized, and in the Farm Bill of 2018, which they passed, which basically legalized cannabis sativa in the US, sativa sativa, they gave the name hemp to any strain of cannabis that contains 0.2 to 0.3 THC or less. And anything over that was termed marijuana. And so marijuana is still illegal in the US. As you would know, the debate is now taking place. But what was on the 0.2 to 0.3, they termed hemp. And that they recognized did not have the high that people get. The THC was at such a low level that it did not affect the brain in the way persons in the way Indica did, and they also recognize that cannabis sativa contains the same CBD that all the other strains have. And so when we're talking about the medical cannabis industry, we need not go the broad spectrum of cannabis. We can have the same CBD that is considered the medical aspect of cannabis from a strain that does not cause the type of damage that the higher levels THC do. And what type of damage I'm talking about here, sir? I'm talking about our young people. I'm really standing up for our young people because we live on 166 square mile rock. And we already know that when you plant a couple cassava sticks, you're lucky if you can reap all, because the real owners will come for them. And we have to ask ourselves, if we are going to start an industry that we can now find the resources to police this thing, what happened to all the farmers who were suffering before? But I'll leave that there. I'm saying that because I do not want this to get into the hands of our children. This is Barbados. Barbados has always pursued its development not at the expense of its people. That is why when international agencies come here and they ask us, why are you doing all this with education? Why are you providing all this? Because we have a vested interest in our people. And all I'm trying to do here is to protect young people. Because the brain takes about 20 to 25 years to develop. And from the time we're born, the brain starts losing cells. Because the brain is one of those organs that regulates itself. If the cells are not useful, it loses them. When young persons, it has been found, when young persons use marijuana, and I'm using the term marijuana here meaning the higher levels concentrations THC, it's found that it can put the hippocampus out of shape and prevent the development of memories. I don't know how many of you have been following the news. Just over a year ago or so, a big thing erupted in Jamaica about the wet. This is where people were soaking marijuana in formaldehyde, making it more potent. And what it did, the dons were using it. They were giving it to the young boys if they wanted them to commit a crime. You smoke this, it will knock everything, turn out the lights for a few hours. You go and commit the crime and you cannot even remember anything after. We do not want that here. We can develop a medical cannabis industry without the dangers of that. Now I know the cynics out there will say, but it's already there. That is true. But it is not there at the hands of the government of Barbados. And we must make sure that whatever decision we make here protects our young people. It will not be at our hands. And it can even give us the latitude to be even more punitive in dealing with persons who are seeking to cultivate strains of cannabis in this country with high levels of THC that we know will cause problems to the minds of our people. Now look, Mr. President, the United States of America, if you know the number 6630507, that is the medical patent that the US government has had since 2003. In 2019, they're still debating whether to legalize something higher than THC level 0.3%. Mexico has spent a whole year and have lapsed. The High Court gave them the opportunity and told them, go ahead, you can legalize it. Mexico has spent a whole year. The threshold in Mexico is 1% THC. We in Barbados need to take small steps when it comes to this matter, because we do not know everything about this substance. What we do know, and what has been researched, is that the CBD can provide the therapeutic things that we need and the medicinal factors that we need, and that can be had from hemp, what we refer to as hemp, which is the low grade that does not have the high levels THC. And that is where I believe we should be looking at this point in time if we're talking medicinal marijuana, cannabis. If we're talking anything other than medicinal, that's when we start looking somewhere else. We're talking medicinal here. And what can a hemp industry do for Barbados? Hemp is one of the most versatile plants in the world. I think they said there are thousands of uses for the hemp. You can make hemp fibers. I can see a whole textile industry developing alongside our medicinal industry. And this is where we should be looking for the development of our people and how we can help our people to grow without putting anyone at risk. I know people will say, but the little children will get it anyway. My thing is this. I remember watching the Clint Eastwood movie, sir, some years ago. Those were the days when every Friday nights and Saturday nights, the boys used to look forward to watching a Western or Kung Fu movie. Can't remember the name of the movie, but I do remember Clint Eastwood went in and he was shooting up. And when he took a pause, there were 3 villains standing. And one of them said, he only has 1 bullet and there are 3 of us. And Clint Eastwood said, but who is willing to take it? And that is the question before us. We can say, but if we don't do this, they'll still get it. Which one will get it? Will it be your child, your grandchild, the child next door? Which one? And we must make sure that if they get it, it is not from our hands. It is not from us. Mr. President, I'm speaking on behalf of parents out there who are crying every night. Crying every night because their little boy just isn't their little boy anymore. Something is wrong with him. Those parents that get on their knees and pray every night because the boy gone in the drug hole. His behavior has changed. He's aggressive. He's not listening anymore. People in Barbados cry every night because of that. I speak as from the experience of a teacher, sir, where I've seen what this thing does to young boys in particular. I've seen young boys bright, minds sparking. And then after a while, you see them come to class and they put their heads on the desk. And then they're unkempt. Their socks are down to their ankles, their feet are white. And then you begin to see the signs in their eyes. And then their face gets greasy because they're not looking after themselves. And then you see the lips begin to blacken. And you know what is happening. And the work falls off. And everything falls apart. I'll give you a story, 2 stories, sir. A young man, one of the brightest science students I ever taught at that early age. Then he started smoking. Lost interest in school. He then left and went abroad. He is now in a prison, locked up for life. I remember another young man, top of the class throughout the school in 4th form. All of us as teachers were so happy. A boy topped the 4th form. We were looking forward to these CXC results. He went home during the summer, and when he came back, we couldn't recognize him. Not one CXC. Mine gone. I said that to say, sir, to pursue a medical cannabis bill industry, we do not need to be so broad in our definition of cannabis. There is a naturally occurring strain out there that can give us what we want without the risk of our children. With regard to the Sacramento cannabis bill, sir, I'll be very brief on this, because my definition of sacrament is not an object. The sacrament is an outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace. What is happening here, sir, is that you have an undefined community with rites and ceremonies that are undefined. And we will run ourselves into trouble with this. And I'm saying this on behalf of the Rastafarian community as well, sir, because we have in this bill, I lost my notes. Yes. We have in this bill exempt event permit. This is on page 8, section 6.1. A person in charge of a place of worship granted a permit in accordance with section 4.3 may make an application for an exempt event permit in the form set out as Form 3 in the first schedule, etc., to observe an occasion of worship or fellowship in a public place. Now remember, there are no defined rites or ceremonies here. I don't know if those who drafted it or those who came up with it know what the rites and ceremonies are. So worship and fellowship in a public place. And to do this, the person is granted permission to use cannabis in a public place, to transport. Persons attending this event can transport no more than 12 grams of cannabis to the public place. And C, the person who has the ultimate control can supply or give cannabis for sacramental purposes at the event. But then, on the commercial use, section 9.1, a person who sells cannabis on the premises of a worship place granted sacramental use permit is guilty of an offense and liable to summary of conviction of $10,000. And subsection 3 of that, a person who sells or offers the sale of any cannabis at the event for which an exempt event permit has been granted is guilty of an offense and is liable on summary conviction to the fine of $10,000 or a term of imprisonment of 2 years. So the problem with this is because you have no defined rites or ceremonies, a public event of worship or fellowship you do not know. So suppose the leader of a Rastafarian community becomes a promoter of Reggae on the Hill and considers that an event of fellowship. Because you'll be singing hymns there, I presume. You don't have to dread to be Rasta and the other things that you sing. I'm just giving a hypothesis here. This bill, and I'm speaking for the Rastafarian community here, this bill prevents them. You see, religion in Barbados has wide latitude. I'm sure that those of you who have been around politics long enough know that the story of a political operative who was holding a meeting in town, lambasting the government one night, and when it came to time to close down the meeting and the police was walking to the podium, he announced a hymn and then preached a sermon. I've said that to say that imagine at a public event, imagine taking up collection at a public event. because you can take up collection. And the religious latitude we have in Barbados, where, for example, I've heard there are some religious leaders who told people, you can't expect a $1,000 blessing if you only give $100. So you can actually put a value to givings. They're not selling, they're taking up collection. So there are loopholes in this bill. Stemming from the medicinal cannabis bill, if we define cannabis in a particular way and narrow it down to anything below THC level 0.3, I don't think the Rastafarians should have a problem with that, because as is stated in this bill, the plant, the object is their sacrament, not what the object does. I'll leave that there. Mr. President, in closing, I wish to remind us of at what point of the year we are. We're at the point of the year we're on the cusp of celebrating the 53rd anniversary of our independence as a people. A proud moment when for 53 years we have charted our own course, we have forged our own way in this world. We have done so patiently. We have done so with a level of frugality and with a level of wisdom that makes us the envy of many in this world. We're also observing the 400th anniversary of the first slaves being brought across the Atlantic, as our Prime Minister and a party just went to Ghana and observed. But there's an element of collective forgetting on either side of the Atlantic about what took place 400 years ago. The Europeans did not just go into Africa and take people out. Africa sold her children. They sold them for beads, they sold them for cloth, they sold them for gunpowder, they sold them for ammunition. And what we've seen is 400 years of struggle. Because any nation that pursues national development at the expense of its children, at the expense of its young people, is a nation that has serious problems. I encourage us, as we consider this medicinal cannabis bill, remember we're dealing with medicinal cannabis. And we can have all the benefits of medicinal cannabis from a strain that does not put our children at risk. With those few words, sir, I thank you.
We recognize her now. Senator Adams.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have had the bad luck in the past to speak after really good speakers, and I just want to commend Senator Rogers on that poetry. And I say that with sort of a slump in my shoulders, because I know my contribution is going to be far more artisanal than what he just gave us. So thank you. It's a pleasure to take part in the debate with that kind of knowledge being displayed. Mr. President, I think we've heard in the introduction, and we've heard several people talk about the therapeutic aspects of what this bill is seeking to bring to the public. You yourself, Senator Walker, spoke of the pain management aspects in particular that we're looking to formalize in a legal framework. And I don't think anybody is against that kind of good. If you can bring relief to chronic arthritis. You mentioned multiple sclerosis, cancer suffering, and a host of other things. So I take that as a given. What also strikes me is that this is intended to be part of a growth effort. And I'll have a few words about the debt restructuring and so on later on in the remarks. But we set the stage and we want to promote growth. I've said before in this chamber that growth typically comes from three things: improvements in productivity, increases in capital investment, and increases in the number of hours worked. Really, what that means is increases in employment. So the government is looking at areas that can be achieved, as Senator Rogers recognized, and I think other senators are also aware of that. I didn't recognize the growth number that you cited, Senator. I mean, I've looked pretty carefully at some of the forecasts, and what I find is the medicinal cannabis industry, which has a lower growth forecast than the recreational, but it's still forecast to grow at about 13% compounded annually. And the market is estimated that somewhere between $6 and $10 billion a year. Nobody is 100% sure. But that data suggests that this is a good target to structure, notwithstanding the reservations that you expressed. Having said that, it's very clear to me, because this happens to be touches on an area I think I know a fair amount about, which is to say banking and payments. It's very clear to me that stimulating this industry and its financing is going to face difficulties. Now, this is not something the government is unaware of, and I think it is worth bearing in mind as we look at this bill that it is not really one that should be considered in isolation from legislation that is pending and coming down the line that specifically seeks to make changes to the structure of our banking sector and our financial services sector, and it has to be seen in that light. Now, why do I set up my contribution that way? I do so because when we're talking about these headwinds, they fall into two categories. One is a set of endogenous factors that are really beyond our control, and the other are a set of structural or internal factors that we can control. And I just want to reference some, I can't remember which senator mentioned it. There was a reference to how far behind we are other territories potentially in developing this industry. Well, I would suggest that maybe we're not so far behind that we can't catch up. And part of our competitive advantage is the fact that we are willing to look carefully at the structural impediments to financing not only this type of industry, specifically medicinal cannabis, but other novel industries that bankers perhaps are unwilling to touch or are unfamiliar with. And in this regard, this is form the second half of my contributions. In this regard, there are things that we can do to get ahead. With the first set of reasons, the external factors that are going to affect us, these are best illustrated by the experience of Uruguay. Uruguay was one of the first, I think it was the first nation to legalize both recreational and medicinal cannabis. And they spent a long time doing it. The reform was passed in 2013, but they took, I think, 4 years to finally implement it in 2017 or early 2018. It took that long because they were careful, because there were objections, because there were corrections to the legislation, but they finally put it in place. They had pharmacies, licensed dispensaries, and everything was rather well thought out. The one thing they didn't consider in advance was what would be the impact of their actions, or the reaction, I should say, to their actions of the American correspondent banks. This is to say the banks who service the Uruguayan banks, who provide external financial services to them. Now, we've heard it inferred or stated fairly bluntly that marijuana is still illegal in the United States, or cannabis, whichever one you, cannabis is not all cannabis is, not all marijuana is cannabis and vice versa. There's a distinction here. It's at the federal level that it is illegal. At the state level, there are 33 states that where it is legal, and there are 11 states where both medicinal and recreational marijuana is legal. But the existence, driven really by the U.S. Patriot Act, which was passed in the wake of the 9/11 bombings, and it's really targeting proceeds coming from the laundering of money associated with illegal drugs. Banks had to respect that. They could not deal, even with a territory where it was legal, they could not deal in marijuana or cannabis because it was not legal on their home territory. As a result, they said, Uruguayan banks, if you have clients who deal in this industry, we're going to have to terminate our services to you. Well, for a bank, that can be a death sentence if you don't have access to the U.S. banking market. And what it has actually done in Uruguay is it has compelled that industry, medicinal marijuana and recreational marijuana, to carry out the vast majority of transactions in cash. So the industry has developed, it has grown, but not as fast as it would have had it had access to a modern set of financial services. Now, there's a interesting wrinkle here, because if we stop the story right there, we could understand the written submission by the Barbados Bankers Association to the Joint Select Committee that was made here, in which they say, reflecting this Uruguayan experience, and I'm quoting from their letter, that these correspondent banks have been known to shut out the local banks as part of their risk appetite decision. And I believe the Barbados Bankers Association suggested as a result of that they would be unable to bank anyone directly or indirectly associated with this trade. Now, this is what I mean by headwinds to financing an industry that you expect to be, you hope to be part of your growth strategy. But the nuance is this. There are banks in Canada that offer financing and banking facilities and loans to marijuana companies, and not just medicinal cannabis, but also recreational cannabis. In fact, earlier this year, I was at a Caribbean Association of Bankers conference in Miami, and the Royal Bank of Canada had the controller of this trade, that is to say, the person who oversaw the extension of facilities to medicinal and recreational marijuana companies present, and which she was explaining how it happened and how they actually put it through, how they got agreement to it, in spite of the Uruguayan experience, which she didn't reference. But it is important to realize that in legal terms, nothing has changed. But this bank anyway decided that it could do something for marijuana growers. And what RBC did, and of course RBC are also a bank here, what RBC did was approach their correspondent banks everywhere where they had that relationship, explain the situation. She didn't say this part, but I will. I'm sure explain how large the market was and how they could do a deal, how the compliance would be heavier. And the correspondent agreed and went ahead, and RBC started in a relatively small way to bank marijuana firms. There's another example with the Bank of Montreal and CIBC, Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, who also are present in Barbados, where the Bank of Montreal and CIBC syndicated a loan to the largest marijuana company in the world, a company called Canopy Growth, to the tune of $80 million. That was this year. So what we have, Mr. President, is a situation where our local banks will say, we can't touch this if you put it on the books. But the same banks in their home jurisdiction are happy to engage because the potential is so big for them. Now, here's what that means. When you have bankers locally, and not just with medicinal marijuana, this applies and has applied in the past to several different industries in this region. When you have the bankers saying, oh, this is a compliance issue, we have to be very careful about KYC, know your customer, anti-money laundering, counterterrorism, financing, and so on. While that is true to a degree, what they really mean when you look at those principles is that for the right price, I will rise above those principles and I will cut a deal. Now that may sound harsh, but that is the reality of what's going on. We're very familiar with the practice of de-risking to us in this part of the world. De-risking is all about profit. It's not about compliance. We are not big enough, in some cases, to make it attractive for these banks to actually do a deal with us. They are happier to say, this is a compliance issue. If you pass that bill, you're going to be in cash. So my hypothesis here, and although this is slightly ancillary to the medicinal cannabis bill in that it applies to all novel efforts to grow the economy that we are likely to come across, is that we have to find ways to overcome both these external factors and the internal ones that put us in this position. So I've spoken about this external one. There's not a huge amount that we can do about that. So let me just turn to the second set of reasons, which I class as internal, things I believe we can do quite a lot about ourselves. At the outset, I spoke about the debt restructuring and setting the scene for growth. That's what we've done. I think it's old news now, but to get to the stage where the debt has been restructured and there's a reset, if you like, and we have this not quite blank canvas, but certainly there's a lot more of the canvas that is blank now than there was before, in order for us to plot growth. We have to take a good look at, in the first instance, the structure, the composition, the parameters in which our banks operate, and also financial services more generally. What do I mean by that? If we look at the five banks, three of which are Canadian, that operate in Barbados, I'm not an anti-bank person, by the way. It's just certain things that they do. I'm anti. The huge benefit of having three large Canadian banks and two significantly sized Trinidadian banks is that it brings an inherent stability to our financial system. These are banks, they're global banks. They have a diversity of operations that gives us this stability in a way that a local bank by itself could not. Even throughout the financial crisis of 2007, 2009, let's say, these banks provided that stability. However, as has been said before, several times, I can remember Senator Drake saying this, everything comes at a cost. Everything has a price. Against this stability, we have lost delegated decision-making powers. We have lost the ability to look carefully at an opportunity before us, assess it for risk, and say yes, maybe, rather than no. What we have in its stead is a centralized template that's applied from Port of Spain or Toronto. In a way, it's a very, it's like a sledgehammer to a walnut. They have their rules. Their rules are their global template. They do not take account of local context. This is what is missing. When people talk about we need to have a local bank, what they really should be saying is we need to have a bank that looks very closely at what our local market does and not at the imperatives imposed by Toronto or Port of Spain. For those things there, they give us stability. They have benefits, and I'm not suggesting we want to lose them, but I am suggesting we want to supplement them with what we've lost. Now, one thing we've definitely lost is this power to decentralize and bring important decision-making and lending practices and even general policy right back down to the Barbadian level. If you look at that story I said with Canopy Growth, RBC, and CIBC, they've retained it. They went against the grain of the prevailing legislation. They knew their local market. Canopy Growth is a Canadian company. Those guys, all Canadians, got around the table, and I can bet you they thought not only about the bottom line, but they thought also about what's best for Canada. How can we promote our own economy? Without a shadow of a doubt. This we don't have here. We don't have a Canopy Growth to lever. We have an idea. We're trying to put it in place. And what we've heard from the Bankers Association is entirely expected. I'll talk about that also in a moment. But it doesn't really help us. We can do like Uruguay and develop on a cash-only basis, and we will, and it will contribute something. But if we were able to overcome some of these internal hindrances that I'm talking about, I believe we could do far better. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about there. In this country, those 5 banks, and I'm going to make 2 or 3 points here, but the bottom line is they're very comfortable. So I'm going to demonstrate in what ways they're very comfortable. So the 5 banks in Barbados, 3 Canadians and 2 Trinidadians, control over 50% of the assets, control or own over 50% of the assets here. That's a comfortable position to be in. Perhaps more importantly, they own or control every single transmission mechanism for money and payments in this country. Now that could be checks, that could be cards, the automated clearinghouse, ACH as it's known, standing orders, direct debits, whatever you can think of, those are all privately controlled financial infrastructure or examples of financial infrastructure. The reality is, and it's been made so in some jurisdictions, that that infrastructure should be a public good, because in the hands of an oligopoly, there's a huge temptation. I don't say it's happening. I do say it's happening inadvertently. I don't say it's happening deliberately. But there's a huge temptation to use that ownership as an exclusionary device to protect your own position. And I would tell you, it is my view that that is what's happening inadvertently or otherwise. Now, when you have that level of control over an economy, you are very comfortable. And you start, if you're a bank, it's inevitable that you start to look for ways to reduce the risk while pursuing revenue generation. Please remember, I don't want to stray too far from the medicinal cannabis bill, but this is very relevant if we want to consider this as a growth industry. If you're this comfortable with this much control in the economic environment, you look for risk-free ways to generate revenue. And nothing exemplifies that more than the way banks have generated fee income. I know this is a very popular item to talk about, but I want to actually, for a change, I haven't heard people do this, put some numbers to it. So I'm going to take the example of Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, CIBC. First of all, their global operations based in Toronto. This is public information, by the way. It's from their 2018 annual report. So deposit and payment related fees plus card fee income as a percentage of their total revenue. It's 12.5% of their total revenue. You know, you go to Buzo, you order a meal, they don't add on 12.5% service charge. Even they stick at 10%. 12.5%. That's page 7 for anybody who wants to check the facts. Now, if you look at the subsidiaries right here, CIBC First Caribbean, they actually are doing even better than the parent. Page 81, note 4. Those same 2 categories of fee are generating CIBC First Caribbean 13.2% of their total revenue, 76.8 million. But here's the part that really struck me. The year-over-year growth on those fees for CIBC First Caribbean is 13%. Now, those who have been following closely will recall that the forecasted growth rate for medicinal cannabis is also 13%. Now, I'm going to ask you, if you wanted there are 2 types of 13%, you know. There's a 13% that you can get by dreaming up fees in your armchair, and there's a 13% you can get by going out and carrying out a lot of hard work assessing a company about to be engaged in the medicinal marijuana industry. Which do you take? So I don't blame the banks, I blame the structure. Of course, they're going to take the easy route. No risk fee generation. It makes perfect sense. It's rational and it's logical. But this is what I'm talking about by structural impediments. 5 banks, they control the infrastructure. There's a phenomenal rate of growth in their fee income. They do not, because of these structures, have an incentive to pursue any kind of investment in medicinal marijuana, however you dress it up. Now, how do you get around that? It's not an overnight fix. You know, I started off talking about the Patriot Act and the Americans and illegality of marijuana in their system. That is all out of our hands. I would, if I had to guess, I would say sometime between now and the next 4 years, that goes away. So we have that to look forward to. But it will not change these structural impediments that we're sitting down on here. So there are several things the government has in mind, and I think they'll go further than what I already know is coming down the legislative pipe. So for example, Payments Network, ACH, there's legislation coming in the new year that would open up access to this, notably for credit unions. However, that is good, but credit unions are all nested by the commercial banks. What that means is they rely on the commercial banks for their external financial services. So you've advanced, but not a great deal. But it's a good starting point. And secondly, the government is also, with the central bank, I believe, is drafting legislation that would widen the number of actors in the financial services arena to include what are called money service providers. So typically this is people like MoneyGram or Western Union, and indeed the firm that I work for, BIT. These are important measures that change the internal structure of what we're looking at, but they need to go further, in my view, and I'm pretty sure discussions are underway on as to how you would do that. But there are other jurisdictions, and I think of places like Kenya and India, but they're not alone, where they have changed their legislation, and what you have found is those parts of the market that commercial banks typically won't touch, and I'm talking about Barbados here. They have a cost base that's important, and they have to generate fees or spread income to cover that and report profits. And perhaps as an aside, it's worth saying that although when people complain about fees and the banks will say, well, you know, banking is expensive, you know. I believe I actually read, I'm going to paraphrase, but I believe I actually read this the last time it happened. And they said, you know, to be able to send money anywhere quite quickly, that costs a lot of money. Okay, I'm not going to debate that, but they still made over $100 million last year in the case of CIBC First Caribbean after taking a haircut on the restructuring. Okay? So banking is expensive, but it still scored $100 million. Now, this is not an industry that is going to innovate. It is an industry that is comfortable. They will find better ways of doing what they're doing, and I don't blame them. They're profiting from the structure. But we know, in our case, to drive growth, such as the growth we are seeking from this bill, that we have to innovate in financial services also. We have to encourage specialist lenders to come in, guys who have different ways of measuring risk. We have to encourage, for example, things like micro-lending. The government carries that out at the moment in a way that I don't believe it should. I believe that should be given over to people who have the experience in doing it and doing it properly. You have to encourage micro-pensions. There are all sorts of things. Specialist insurers who can come in, and we have very important insurance costs linked to natural disaster and catastrophe and so on. There's a wide swathe of the market that people could come in and develop that would impact all the efforts we're aiming at industries like the medicinal cannabis bill for growth. But to attack those, we have to change the internal structure of financial services and banking. As I say, fortunately, the government is well aware of the challenges. I wanted to make these remarks specifically because it's easy to try and shoot down this bill based on the status quo. But things are changing, and the government also is thinking of those examples of where it can help. I support this bill. I'm wary about how long it'll take it to get up and running, but overall I'm optimistic, and I encourage other senators to be so also. I'm obliged to you, sir.
Mr. President, I beg that the city be now suspended until 8:25.
The question is that this session be now suspended until 8:30. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it, and we are now in suspension until 8:30.